Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Gainsight's General Manager of EMEA, Dan Steinman.
Lightning and the thunder, 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 feel the thunder. Lightning and the thunder.
For the next raffle. Okay, so I have bad news. My voice has held out, so we're going to do one more session before you guys get to see Dr. Brian Cox. So, having said that, let me welcome to the stage a couple of new friends of mine from Finastra, Tom Kilroy and Greg Root. Come on out, you guys. Tom,
Thank you.
great to see
Where do
you.
you want us to sit?
Greg,
Thank you.
either side.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we're the last thing before they, whatever. Anyway. So we have 20 minutes. This is going to be fun. It'll go by really fast. So Greg and Tom work at a company called Finastra, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, and I'll ask Tom to go first, and he can kind of describe who Finastra is.
So thanks, Dan. My name's Tom Kilroy. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Finastra, a company you probably haven't heard of. We were formed just over a year ago from the merger of Misys and D&H. The company is around about 10,000 employees, just over $2 billion of revenue, and spread all over the world. And we came together, two equal-sized companies, and I was on one side, and Greg was on the other. So.
Yes. And now we're there together.
Yeah, and as soon as we come off stage, we won't speak to each other at all.
Yeah, and I'm stuck in between.
That's
so
right.
Don't get mad at each other till afterwards. Okay, Greg?
So my role, I have customer support for the organization across the globe. We're in 48 countries, supporting 140 with about 1,000 support reps.
Yep. So historically, Misys and I think D&H were essentially on-prem software companies.
That's true.
I don't know if that's still true or not, but why don't you tell me, is that still true? Is there a cloud thing in your future? What's happening there?
Yeah, so there's a cloud thing in our present.
Okay.
I mean, we are traditionally on-prem companies, but in fact, we already have probably close to $400 million of revenue in the cloud. And we have a total of 9,000 customers globally, and about 3,000 of them are in Azure already. So we have our own data centers as well. So we have a pretty significant cloud business, yeah.
So you're serious about this thing?
Yeah, we're serious about it. Yeah, we got the religion.
Yeah. Well, that's why I invited Tom and Greg to come, because they're going through this transformation in some ways that many of you are going through, or at least thinking about, or maybe even are further along than most. But let me ask you about that, Greg. When did the term customer success, whether you use it internally or not, but when did this thing kind of come on your radar?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really started to come on our radar as we came together. So as we brought the two companies together, the complexity more than doubled. So we did have the traditionally on-prem Misys entity. We had D&H, which was a mix, put them together, realized the same drivers that all of you are realizing. We realized our numbers around churn were significant. We realized that we were operating not just as two distinct entities, but frankly, the way each company came together, we had done many mergers. So we were operating like 10 distinct companies as customers talked to us. So I really realized that we needed a platform to come together. We needed a way to rally ourselves around the customer. And that's when customer success started to come to the forefront for us.
So the challenge that you guys are undertaking is a big one.
Yeah.
Merging two companies, different philosophies, different cultures, all those things. And then at the same time, trying to change the DNA, or what I call the DNA of the company, to be more customer-centric.
Yeah.
Did I articulate one of your big challenges, right, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously the cultural change around that is really significant. So, we've gone from having kind of 2,000 customers to 9,000. And so what we've decided to do is, I should make it clear, I don't have a background in customer success, right? I run operations and several $100 million of P&L, and I'm very interested in what customer success can do for us to reduce churn. Because bluntly, and I won't give you the exact numbers, but we churn tens of millions of dollars of recurring revenue a year, which is avoidable. So there's a very significant financial impact. If we can halve that, if we can take 25% of it off, it'll make a big difference to our business. One of the other groups that rolls up to me actually is HR. So I'm responsible for the HR team on the executive committee. And so culture change is very much at the center of what we're trying to do. So where we've articulated this is, we've published to our company, a Mission 2021, which is where we have a solar system. It kind of gives you a science theme.
All right.
We've got customer in the center as the sun. And we've got to transform the customer experience as one of 10 key initiatives. So one of the things we're trying to do at the moment is a really significant effort across the company to try to get customer-centric culture as a really important part of what we do. And now that's a big effort. 10,000 people, we've got to take them on that journey. It's not an overnight thing, but I think we're starting to make progress on that, but we're certainly putting a huge amount of emphasis on it.
Yeah. How do you see it, Greg, coming from D&H? Maybe you see it from a slightly different angle?
It's a little bit different both from D&H and from my role. So, coming in as a support person and driving the support organization, having the company come out and say, we're going to be customer centric. And by the way, we really have 10 goals across the company. One of them is around customer centricity. It's hugely empowering. It's also one of those things that when you say it fast, it sounds easy. But as you start to dig into the cultural elements, it really does take a fundamental shift, not just in organizations like mine, but making sure that, as folks in the room realize on customer success, that it starts pre-sales. It has to be in sales. It has to be in every element of the life cycle. And that's really the journey we're on, and I think all of us are on. But for us coming together, we first had to create a culture for Finastra, make sure we had one entity that we were working for, and then start to inculcate it. So it's been an interesting journey to come to.
Yeah. I think one of the other things, you guys probably both had this in your individual companies where the range of customers, when you have a lot of them, tends to get really broad, really big customers, some really small ones. And now when you bring it together, that's probably even more true. So how do you think about customer success? I sounded just for a second like a Canadian, didn't I?
You did, yeah.
I said a bit.
If you threw an A in there, you were good.
Jeez, scared myself. How do you think about delivering customer success, and how's that going to be different at Finastra? It's obviously different, but how's that going to be different between those different segments?
Yeah, it's interesting. You can really bifurcate our business. So we have a communities market in the U.S. that deals with banks that are tier 3 and below, so smaller community banks. And then the rest of our business really operates like an enterprise business. So we have two distinct programs that we're going forward with. Obviously, the commonality in the tool sets we're going to use, the commonality in the nomenclature and the approach that we're taking, but you really do need to know your customers in those two different bases. We have very sophisticated IT departments that we deal with in enterprise, and we have community bankers where the CFO is the CIO, and they're dealing with different types of issues. When you're a community banker, you walk out of church, and if someone's got an issue with their bank account, they're hating you right there, right? You're not dealing with that in an enterprise business. So you need a very different level of agility to deal with the two, and you need very different employees. So it really is looking at two programs that happen to share the same process and the same tool set, but very distinct processes.
And Tom, are you guys going to attack both of those kind of at the same time with the same vigor? Is it a priority for you?
We're going to end up doing everything, but we're starting with our community customers, right? So, we have 4,500 of them. Some of them find us complex to deal with, so that's where we're starting. And really that's focused on our US business. That's where we'll begin. We'll try and learn the lessons, test and iterate from that. And we're in the middle of, we're just beginning our Gainsight deployment, but we're very determined to make it data-driven. So one of the reasons we chose that particular group of customers is 4,500, you've got a meaningful number, you can start to actually get a data lake together, we give you interesting insights about usage, adoption, those kinds of things. So we think it's the right place for us to start, and then obviously roll out towards our enterprise customers at the very large end.
If I can add to that, I think the other nice thing about the community space for us is you're dealing with customers, obviously as individuals, but more in segments because of the size and the thousands of them. So as we make change with the tool sets and we make change with the process, it's a great proof point for us that then we can take down to a more individual customer level in our enterprise business. So we thought it was a better place to start.
Yeah, we were originally planning to have Natalie Gammon here, who's the Chief Cloud Officer at Finastra. She had a family emergency and couldn't make it. But I still want to pose the question to Tom, because that's not a title I hear very often, and I think most people probably don't. So when you think about that, or when Finastra thinks about that, what does Chief Cloud Officer mean? What do they do?
Sure. So Natalie sends her apologies. I'm sorry she can't be here. So for us, Chief Cloud Officer is all about, well, obviously it runs our cloud delivery towards our customers. We run, we have a number of data centers, and we have a lot of customers on Azure. So it owns the strategic relationships with cloud partners, such as Microsoft, but it ties all the way back up into the product journey to be ready for the cloud. So you're talking about, again, a cross-functional piece, which goes all the way from how do we optimize products for the cloud, and ultimately we build them native for the cloud, and the feedback loop into the product group, all the way through to what are we running on Azure, with AWS,
Yeah.
with the various different partners that we work with. We do a lot of stuff with Microsoft. And so it's that whole journey, including things like the commercialization of them. So, so she has responsibility across that whole set. And it's about 400 people working in that area. So it's a pretty good sized group. Yeah.
And the thing I was, sorry, to tapped you at the beginning, I was going to say I'll record this for Natalie's sake, but you did a great job of describing the role. But the second piece I would add is it's almost as big a cultural transformation as the customer success piece, because
Sure.
a lot of our business, first of all, we had very different definitions of the cloud. So we had to harmonize on that. And it's a very different level of engagement running a cloud business than it is an on-prem business. So that has been a big body of the work that she also does, is making sure that we're pivoting our company to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, it turns out those two things are kind of hand in glove. The movement to the cloud, the centricity around the customer have come together. And part of it is because it's just so much more pressure on the vendor to deliver to a customer who no longer has to buy hardware. They don't buy our software. They don't build the data centers anymore. We have to take all of that responsibility. So I'll ask both of you guys this question. You're coming from a traditional space where you probably, I think this is true, you didn't have anybody in the company with the title customer success. You had lots of other functions. So how are you going to fill that gap? Are you going to fill it with current people who are just going to do a slightly different job? Are you going to change roles? Are you going to bring a new organization in? I mean, there's probably some of all of those things, but Greg, why don't you describe what your vision is for attacking this?
Well, we have a head of customer success that we've added to the organization. I think he's in the crowd somewhere. And we're making sure that we, one, elevate the profile in the company of customer success. So we have the buy-in. We have the buy-in at our CEO level, and he can articulate where we want to go from a customer success perspective, which I think is impressive. But then it really is inculcating it in the business, really looking at how we pivot from our traditional way of dealing with customers to make sure all the roles understand what the endpoint is and then where we are in the journey. And so I think one of the things that we're starting to do much better is to be really transparent with employees on, this is a journey. It's not an endpoint we're going to get to tomorrow. But here's where we need you to be, and here's why.
We have groups within the business, Dan, who do things like customer value and systems advisory, which is once you're in production. The thing about those groups historically is I think they do great work, but customer value for us was very much about the sales pursuit, not necessarily during the life cycle. So we're shifting some of the activity we have to think about the life cycle in a different way. So I think the short answer to your question is it's a blend of people from outside who've got capability and done it before, and people from inside who know the business and have some of the tools that we're already using. And that's how we're thinking about bringing it together.
Yeah. I think when you start putting these motions in place at a company that hasn't done it before, you find a lot of people who will say, well, I've been kind of doing that, right? This has been my responsibility. And one of the biggest changes that happens is you're actually centralizing and figuring out how to measure it, because you're taking it off of 25 different people's plates and giving it to one who will then redistribute it, but under the auspices of some clear measurements that you're going to do, as opposed to everyone do your best to make sure customers are happy. Which leads me to my next question, which is, how will you guys know, and when do you think you'll know whether this is working or not?
Yeah, so ultimately, I think in the end, and I mentioned, the financial incentive at the beginning, ultimately net expansion in existing customer footprint has to be the ultimate measure of it. But there'll be a number of other things, the net promoter that we get, those kinds of things, satisfaction levels in customers, and in employees as well. I mean, because that feedback loop where if you're doing a better job for your customers, you feel better about the work you're doing and the company you're working for. So I think those two things are very closely tied. And so we'll see, we hope to see it show up in all those things, but I suppose, the hard-nosed answer is net expansion.
Yeah, I'll hand that over to you in a second, Greg, but I wanted to double down on that one, Tom, for a second, because you said earlier that the HR function reports to you.
Yeah.
It is really clear from tons of surveys that customer satisfaction, customer success is very closely tied to people's success and people's satisfaction in their jobs.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've seen that as well, or you have that vision as well.
So I think it ties into the piece of satisfaction for all of us in our jobs, which is, are you doing something useful, right? And does anyone care? And that whole thing about how customers interact with us and the way that augments the experience that employees have, that's really important.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very real. And your point about people being positive about this, that I'm doing part of that message. what we found as we started to stand up the capability and do our pilot and things is the number of people putting up their hands saying, I really want to get close to this, I want to get into this,
Yeah.
is really strong.
Yeah.
A lot of people feel very
Yeah.
good about it, which is great.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah, it's so awesome early on at Gainsight. We had so many people who wanted to do the right thing for the customer, it actually became a problem because too many people were getting involved. But at least you start with passion,
Yeah, exactly.
then you rein it in. So Greg, that previous question back to you, what, I don't know if you know how long, obviously you don't know how long it's going to take, but what are you looking for as signs that it's actually moving in the right direction?
I think Tom covered a number of things, obviously, for the end state. I think on the way to the journey, I think really getting to a point where we are tying our success to customer outcomes. So making sure that that's the way we go to market, making sure that that's the way we sell, making sure that we're actually measuring that and pushing it through the organization, I think will be a very positive early indicator, and when we're ramping up to do that. But I think that will be the pivot point where we will really start to see acceleration in the customer success program, because it'll have pushed its way through the entire organization.
Yeah, with this number of customers you have, and I know because we've talked about this, Greg, this is obviously about shoring up retention on particular parts of your market, but there's also an efficiency play here that's really important. When you have as many customers as you do, you say, okay, 9,000 customers, do the math. Okay, we only need about 2,700 CSMs. I don't think you're going to hire that many.
Yeah.
So I know you think about efficiency. What's your plan in that world?
It's an interesting question. We just had our board meeting yesterday, and I presented on this. And so I talked about...
Did you ask for 2,700?
Yeah, I'm smart enough not to do that. That would have been my last ask, to put it that way. But one of the things we went in was we started to show, here's how we're going to leverage Gainsight, the tools that we have. Here's how we're going to leverage AI so we can take away the simple work so that we have our employees actually focused on the things where we can add value. The other thing that people don't talk about, but as you move from on-prem to cloud, a number of our partners, I'll use Microsoft as an example, they saw an 11x increase in customer support tickets, right? We're hoping ours is a little lower than that. But still, to your point, you can't hire an army to answer those. So you just need to be smarter about what you're doing. We need to take the non-technical questions. And in our communities market, 40% of our issues are non-technical in nature. They're education related. So you have opportunities where you can leverage lots of different automation to pull that forward. So to your point, when we're thinking about, okay, how do we actually drive value? Where do we best add people in our customer advocacy groups, in our CSMs? How are we adding back in the right place and making sure that we're taking away the efficiencies in others to fund that?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, we all deal with this, right? Get enough people in a business, and somehow the world of automation has to help those people become more efficient. It's just the way it works. And we think Excel isn't automation because it's kind of not, but still every little piece of technology helps us to be more productive. It's our goal. So Tom, there's a bunch of CSMs out here. Is it fair to say that you guys are kind of open for business and looking for resumes?
Yes. Simple
Okay,
answer.
you guys heard it here. Find these two guys as soon as we're done here. Okay, let's take a look at Slido. There's a few questions that have come in. So let's see if we can take on a couple of these in our last 2 minutes here. What difficulties have you overcome moving customers from an on-site solution to cloud? I think that word is supposed to be cloud. And how? That's a really good question, because we talk about the challenge for us internally, but this is hard for customers, and sometimes the conversation with customers is really hard too. Who wants to?
You go, Greg. You go.
Sure. So a couple things. In our space especially, dealing with FIs, financial institutions, there's a couple extra nuances there, because first of all, getting them to be comfortable moving to a cloud solution is the first step. Making sure we're communicating, making sure that we're doing that. And then it is where we're starting that outcome management first. Okay, let's be very clear on what we're going to be handling for you and what we're not. Getting in and doing all the background work to make sure that all of our handbooks, everything else is in place. But the issue internally has been, it is a fundamentally different world to own the entire environment versus owning a piece where you can push back. So we are going through that cultural transformation, and I would say the easier parts have been technical and process related. The cultural piece of getting everyone on board to own that has been the toughest.
Yeah, I mean, you could describe it like this. We traditionally on the on-prem business have known a lot about the economics of building software and installing it, and not an awful lot about the economics of running it. And that learning that, really learning it, and being able to do that piece for your customers is a huge part of it.
I was just going to say that's a totally new muscle if you haven't exercised it before, right?
Yeah, and I think there's another thing about our particular sector, because it's financial services, it's very highly regulated.
Yes.
So in any regulated situation, you know, customers' willingness to move certain things to the cloud has varied as they've become more comfortable, frankly, as regulators have become more comfortable.
Yeah.
So we've seen that shift in our industry, probably behind some other industries, but as that's happened, they've been more willing to take certain things to the cloud.
Yeah. There was one other question. I'm going to try to remember what it said because I liked it. And it was when you move to the cloud and you move to customer success, there's a lot of traditional roles that might have to change, like service delivery management or even measurements. You know, we talk about utilization all the time when you do professional services. There's an argument that in a cloud customer success lifetime value world, utilization and gross margin on services is less important than delivering success. So how do you guys think about doing that as you have to move people that are in older traditional roles maybe into new ones or new titles at least?
Yeah, there's a couple things. You mentioned the services piece. I mean, the services piece goes away from being measured on margin to how fast can we get people to adopt. And that is a fundamental shift. And it's even for your investors in the company to understand why that's your new metric, right? The time to value is the key. So there are those metrics that need to change in the education around that. And then there really is getting the company to buy into that switch from your employees is critical.
Yep.
And I think you can help by grouping things and having, you know, teams that are around certain areas. So I mean, because in the end, some of it's quite fundamental. Like in the sales motion, totally different. Right? So you don't necessarily want people trying to do both. I think you need to be prepared to say, look, we're going to do some of this stuff in a different way.
Yeah. Well, good. That took about 2 minutes to do 20 minutes for some reason. Anyway, so join me in thanking Tom and Greg for coming up here and spending some of their time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.